Just really something.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're looking at here, Jim, is the total supply of the US dollar between 1960 and 1975. We can go back a little further. This is a graphic I made a while ago. So there have been examples of hyperinflation in the past in the United States, granted not for a very long time, but we did have two central banks before the Federal Reserve's creation in 1913. Wrong century there. But yeah, 1913 was signed into law, and the dollar, the depression and everything after 1913, between 1913 and 1960, it lost a lot of its value. So if we look at the supply, again, if we think of this as a metric of the openness of the monetary system, we can see it goes up dramatically. Now, the dollar bubble that caused Richard Nixon to detach the US dollar from gold, that's what's roughly there in the 60s, we can see. 1971 is when the gold standard ends. That's when it was quote unquote cut off temporarily from the quote unquote speculators. And again, when Richard Nixon in his speech, I encourage you, anyone watching, to go watch it. When he refers to the speculators, what's he referring to? He's referring to the people that are trying to have the water flow in the direction it's supposed to go. And so anyway, because they didn't want to have the speculators price the dollar based on reality, they instead detached the dollar from reality. So after there, the depeg of gold and the dollar, we see the inflationary decades of the 70s. You were alive then, along with a lot of other people today to remember that. That's what we're looking at there. And now if we go out a decade or two here, then we go to the 80s and the 90s. So again, we have where the gold standard ends. And then 1981, under Reagan, we have 1 trillion in national debt. And that was a big deal then. It made headlines. You probably remember that.
Yep,
Today it's 30 times larger, of course, or over 30 times larger. But that's where we crossed 1 trillion in national debt for the first time in 1981, 10 years after 1971. And so, of course, going out further, we see an increase in the rate there towards the end. And as we approach great financial crisis here, what we're looking at, here we go. This is in 2022. So again, this is a little outdated, but it's the same idea. Here we're looking at, we can see the great financial crisis here, along with recessions. So we see all the recessions of the previous decades, the great financial crisis, of course, and the lockdowns of 2020, if you can see towards the right. So the 70s of inflation has already been dwarfed, and the trillion national debt in 81 has been dwarfed. The war on terror, Bush onwards, we can see that in the early 2000s and that excess spending. And then you see right there in that red circle, that brief leveling off. That's the 2008 bank bailouts. That's when all this debt was collapsing. And when debt collapses, the total supply of money also collapses. So that's that little indentation there. And then after that, we have just seen the 2020 stimulus and bailouts that's, largely responsible for all the inflation we have. And so, Jim, like you were saying with the 30 trillion in debt, and like I was saying that how it's actually 170 trillion in unfunded liabilities. If we go out, we project Social Security, Medicare, and the ballooning expenses we have out, say roughly 20 years to 2045, we have a really big problem, clearly. According to the Medicare Board of Trustees, roughly 2026, 2027 or so, Medicare will begin to be insolvent. And granted, again, when we talk about this, we're obviously, even if the programs may exist beyond that day, I'm not saying Medicare ends in that day. I'm just saying that's when the Board of Trustees say it's going to become partially insolvent and more insolvent as a function of time. And so when there's that insolvency, and we don't want Medicare to go away because we care about our hardworking Americans, vote for me. What are we going to do when there is that insolvency? We just print new money. And so when we have that reality in 2026 and cross 50 trillion in debt towards the end of the decade here, and then you mentioned Social Security. Again, what is Social Security? You have a system that requires an exponential new number of members by paying in to pay out the people that were in earlier, and that's pretty much exactly the definition of a Ponzi scheme. A lot of people find that offensive, but that's the truth. If Social Security only works if we have an exponentially larger group of people paying in. And people will say, oh, that's true with Bitcoin and everything else. And it's like, yeah, sure. Same is true with real estate. Same is true with gold. Same is true with every commodity. That prices only go up if more people pay in. But the difference with Social Security is that it pays yield. Bitcoin does not pay yield. Bonds pay yield. you know, and that's the difference there. I made my point there,
Hmm.
but a lot more can be said there. So, you know, for me, in my mind, I'm already thinking in terms of quadrillions because this is like our best case scenario, more or less, that we'll be thinking of quadrillions in 20 years or so. And so, in my mind, assuming we have another lockdown, recession, war, whatever, you know, or entitlement program, you know, it doesn't have to be violent per se, but whatever the case, I expect over the next 20 years, we'll only have more spending programs. And so, really, if we're going to be thinking like, okay, in terms of quadrillions, for unfunded liabilities in a couple of decades, to me, I think it's already almost time to start thinking about it now because, you know, again, you know, if we just go back in time to the 2008 crisis, the Trouble Asset Relief Program, I believe was what, 800 billion? You might know, Jim, right? It's either 600, 800
Hmm.
billion. You know, that's not a lot of money today.
No,
You know,
not
yeah,
trillions, just not what it used to be, as they say.
yeah. The whole housing bubble, the whole liquidity save after the great financial crisis was, you know, between half a trillion to $1 trillion. Now we're multiple trillions. Probably the next crisis, whatever it is, it'll be tens of trillions and the very low tens of trillions, and then it just continues from there. So again, this is true for all kinds of other countries. We don't have time to go into those now, but if we just go over here. So
So
again,
I think, Luke, they're either, like you say, they're gonna have to inflate the dollars to
yeah,
cover this,
correct.
or another scenario that's possible is that this all of these programs are going to be completely means tested. And I can see a combination of this. And they're going to
Yeah,
say, if you have assets, you're not going to get the same thing that someone that doesn't have assets.
yeah,
And I think this is, you can talk to people in Greece about this and other,
yep.
where things have happened. This is, I think it's going to be a combination. So there's going to be some real unrest. And that's why I love that you had those slides before when you have that corrupt monetary, what it does to the society,
Yeah,
the ever
mhm,
the loop.
yeah.
I that was so well put. I just enjoyed that a lot.
Well,
It's
thank you.
spot on.
I appreciate the compliment. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be smiling when we're talking about this,
I know
but
it's
yeah,
just
I really believe that this, as a function of time, here or now, society feels really weird right now. It feels a lot weirder than 5 years ago, and 5 years ago it felt a lot weirder than it did 5 years
right.
before that. And I'm an optimist. You know, people that call me a moon boy for talking about Bitcoin think I'm an optimist, but the reality is that I'm equally a pessimist. You know, this system that is a violation of the law of conservation of energy and incentivizes people to act less morally and thinker in a shorter and shorter time
Right.
preference. Like the only possible route forward is that it gets worse. And I think we're coming up on the point here where the system and the social layer of Bitcoin are so obviously superior to the alternate that in, you know, a matter of years we'll start to see that transition occur. And I think one way at which people will evaluate the morality and the soundness of that system is in supply. I think there are other data points people use too, but I think one of the main ones is supply. And so if we look at the supply here again, you know, going back to our much earlier in the conversation, the supply of Bitcoin. If we're looking between 2009 and 2022 here, those are the total number of Bitcoins that have been created. And then if we overlay on the same timeline the US dollar from 1960 to 2022, we see that, you know, obviously both have gone from zero supply to max supply, where it is today.
Hmm.
And if we go out roughly 20 years or so to 2045 or so, considering how much has been created in the last couple of years compared to the previous 107 years of
Mm.
the Federal Reserve System, you know, if we just put that out, Bitcoin supply will increase, but the supply of the dollar increases a much greater amount. And as you saw there briefly, the relative supply of dollars in existence previously goes down as a ratio compared to the total supply. And so what you
Boy.
see is that, you know, again, if one is an optimist and assume the dollar is going to survive a century after that, the percentage of them that exists today just continues to go down and down and down forever. And it has to, because if we borrow more dollars into existence, we have to create dollars in the future to pay off the interest of our current dollars. And so at
Yeah.
the time of this recording, Jim, you know, 90% now, I believe it's 92% actually, of all Bitcoins have been created, and way less than 1% of the dollars have been created. And so, you know, I talk with people and they think that, you know, $100,000 per Bitcoin is bullish, or 500,000 or 1 million. And the way I put it is that, what if Bitcoin is a future monetary stock of the earth? How do we price it? Well, the only logical way is in infinity. One of my threads was about a game of Monopoly. If we're thinking about a game of Monopoly, the Monopoly dollars have value within that system, that, again, board, that board of rules, that given paradigm of Monopoly with all the little plastic houses and everything, and
Yes.
it has value within that. But as soon as you start thinking outside of that set of rules, all of a sudden it doesn't have any value. What is the exchange rate between a dollar, like in our wallet? Like if we go into our wallet here, I have a 20 on me. Like what's the exchange rate between a dollar, real money that I can actually spend, versus Monopoly dollars? It's like there is no exchange rate, because they're incompatible systems.
Right,
They're different sets of rules. And so the thing with Bitcoin, most people look at it and think it's an allocation of their portfolio and this and that, the other, and perhaps for now it is, but I believe fundamentally they're inherently contradictory systems. We're comparing the Federal Reserve's ledger with the Monopoly board games rules, that instruction cards ledger. And in competition to those two systems, we have this algorithm floating out there in cyberspace that we call Bitcoin, that has a brute force physical cost, and the best set of rules wins. The best game of chess wins. And in the same way that the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Monopoly game has no exchange rate because it's laughable, I believe in the same way, in an alarmingly short period of time, it will be the same way between Bitcoin and every fiat currency.
So knowing this and trying to act on this as someone that's trying to preserve our capital, and I think you've taken a similar tack as I have. You value real estate. It's something you can put your hands on, which I have more faith in that. That's why I've always invested in that, because I can see it, I can feel it, I know what the return, that something solid like that. And there was a great country western song that was popular in the fall, "Buy Dirt." Grandpa said, "Just buy dirt," and they always say, by shoreline, they're only making so many, there's only so much shoreline. So if we want to preserve our capital, this is what I'm going to call on your expertise then. What would you recommend for someone getting started out? What is the best way to put some of our assets, why it's tradable right now, before it isn't, to get in on this? What would you, I want to put you out on a limb here.
No,
Luke, what would you recommend for someone to say, well, this is where you would need to invest? Would you want to invest in an exchange that does it on the trading? Would you try to buy a piece of Bitcoin? And how would a person go about doing this? Some practical things to help me preserve my capital so I have something to leave for my offspring someday. Because eventually you'll be in the same position that you hope to pass on not only your knowledge, but something maybe that you've created that will help make their life, your energy, but to help make their life better.
Yes, that's all.
I know your parents would say the same. Your parents would say the same thing. They're hoping that they tried to make the world things better for you.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, the reason I'm laughing is because, Jim, I've talked to so many people, and I'm really glad we're recording this, because I can genuinely say I think you understand it so much faster than other people. Like the fact that you're saying,
oh, thank you.
Before it's not tradable and this, that, and the other, like you get it. I think you get it to, a degree much better than the average person that's only given it a few hours of thought. So what I would say is that you're spot on about not becoming tradable. Either Bitcoin works or it doesn't. Either Nikola Tesla and Henry Ford and Milton Friedman, either that vision is correct or it isn't. In the same way that a plane either flies or doesn't, or in the same way that a satellite orbits or doesn't, it's the same way with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is only going to be in one of two spots in a year, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years.
Yes.
It's either going to be the global monetary stock, or it will have failed and died. Because we're talking, again, about engineering phenomena. And if we assume Bitcoin is that thing, it is a one, then it's consumed everything. If we assume it isn't and it's a zero, then It's done. It's binary. It's 1 or 0. There's no logical world that exists where Bitcoin has some percentage of everything else. Either it consumes
Or it
all
isn't.
monetary premium, or it isn't.
Right.
And so
Right.
my practical encouragement to the average person listening to this is get off a 0% allocation as quickly as you can. And the reason for that is because if this is a 1, if this is a closed system, if this is what I'm claiming it is,
Mhm.
then the inherent risk in everything else is much higher than we perceive. A lot of people I know, Jim, such as yourself, that own real estate or bonds or this, that, the other, they believe these are low risk instruments. And to a certain degree, yeah, you can make that argument, but I would say that the risk is substantially higher than people realize. If we take real estate as an example, because we're both in that world, I like real estate because I could borrow crazy tons of money against real estate at stupid low interest rates. And the relative value of my mortgage, my fixed rate mortgage against that real estate goes down forever. But in the same way, Jim,
Exactly.
yeah,
People, yes, that's the beauty of it. You're paying that off in
yeah,
in
but
2023 dollars.
exactly,
That's the beauty of it.
yeah,
That's why it worked. That's why, but see, we're going by historical precedents, which I was
exactly.
raised with before, but I also was on here when we couldn't dream to have an
How's,
iPhone in our
mm-hmm,
pocket. That it was a big, yeah, it was a big deal when
yeah,
I finally had a bag phone that I could go outside of a rental property and
yeah,
make a phone call.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it all these things that you could never conceive. It's just like my dad who was passed when he was in the one-room schoolhouse, and the teacher had him come out and they said a plane is going to fly over. These kids had never seen a plane before.
wow,
So that's how that it just it's kind of puts it into perspective. So
certainly
then,
does.
so how do I buy a Luke? How do I buy a piece of this Bitcoin? Are
Yeah,
they
yeah,
cutting it up? Is there people that are
oh yeah,
cutting these up and all this? What would
sure,
be a
sure,
good a couple of good places where a person could invest? Why, like I said, it's still doable.
yeah.
That you would recommend.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think before that, I just want to say real quick that my point being that in the same way that a mortgage goes down against real estate forever because they're compared to real estate, there's only more mortgages. In the same way, even though there's only so much shoreline, there's only so many houses, the supply of Bitcoin is absolutely finite. And so in the same way, there's so much more real estate than Bitcoin. So I would say for your first question of a practical allocation, I would say for the average person, I would encourage them just to get off zero. Even if we're talking
Mm-hmm.
like $100, at just 100, or even, again, I have a couple 20s here, just, 20, 40s, just take some amount of spending money that you'd spend on a lottery or a sports ticket or a couple of beers anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and just buy some Bitcoin. And the reason for that is because if this thing is what we think it is, that amount, however little you buy, inherently will eventually become worth more valuable than everything else you own.
And what was
As
Luke, quickly
mhm.
before I forget it? What did it start trading at back in 2009? How many pennies?
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. Oh, I have the perfect chart to show you from one of my favorite folks on Twitter. Let's see how quickly I can do this. Oh, I'm good. Okay, here we go. I was fast. All right. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is the price of Bitcoin. Now, before I play, I just want to clarify what we're looking at here. On the left, we're looking in linear terms. So linear, again, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the average
Mm-hmm.
person listening. And on the right side, we're looking at logarithmic terms, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. And the reason it's important to look at both views is because human emotion likes to think in linear terms. But
Mm-hmm.
technology and math likes to operate in logarithmic terms. And what so many people do, Jim, is they look at Bitcoin going up and down in a volatile fashion, and they think, oh my goodness, it's a bubble. It's a bubble, it's a bubble, it's going up, and then it crashes. Oh, it must be dead. And then, oh, it's a bubble, it's going up, it's going, and then it crashes, it must be dead. But in reality, if we look at a logarithmic scale here, if you look to the right, Jim, that orange line is
Yes.
Bitcoin's
Isn't there?
price.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah,
See that?
it's actually, again, if you stop thinking in terms of 1, 2, 3, and you start thinking in terms of 10, 100, 1,000,
And
Bitcoin
look at
actually,
long-term trends. That is such a great
yeah,
that is
yeah.
so good. I need you to send that to me.
Yes,
I need that chart.
yes, his pseudonym is Wicked Smart because he's wicked smart.
Okay.
So you can look him up.
Yep.
But yeah,
Okay, I will.
just to play it real quick, the history is that it starts at 0. 6 cents is
Mm-hmm.
technically the first recorded
Mhm.
price, but really theoretically it's zero. And then of course today it's roughly 20,000 or so. So what we have is in 2009 it's created. The first bubble in 2011 skyrockets $30, crashes 95%. A couple years later, skyrockets again, crashes 80% or so. And then going 2017, when I first heard about it, skyrockets, crashes again. The recent one in 21, 22. And then if we go out further, this white line is a hyperbolic tech adoption curve. And if we just assume that and assume Bitcoin survives, basically Bitcoin will reach every conceivably tradable price for the US dollar.
Mhm.
So it starts from basically nothing, which is where it has to start if we're talking about commodities purely volatile
Mhm.
on a free market basis. That eventually then, in the same way that the dollar consumes all monopoly dollars, in the same way Bitcoin eventually consumes all political currency unit dollars, the US dollar, euro, and everything else of that sort. So I don't know where it's going in the short term. That's the second practical thing, not just to get off zero, but also to stop predicting where it's going next because we have no idea. But if we assume it survives, and if we assume that it continues its adoption curve,
Mhm.
then it should just continue to appreciate in price and relative value with everything else. So that's the how much. Just get off zero, even just $100.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not
Mhm.
telling you go all in.
Right, right.
Only buy what you're comfortable with as you learn as a function of time. The second thing being, don't try to predict its exchange rate with the US dollar, because if it
Mhm.
has an exchange rate with the US dollar, it's cheap. And then the third thing would be that for the average person, Jim, starting out like yourself, when we're still in this era of exchanges, I would say just buy an exchange with really low fees and buy some Bitcoin and then learn as soon as you can after that, ideally immediately, but I know people need time to learn. Then figure out how to have your own storage, your own cold wallet, hot wallet, everything like that. You know, in the same way that you go to a bank and you have IOUs of a piece of
Mhm.
paper saying, I own the gold. Yeah, you own that, but you don't own the gold. In the same way, if you go to an exchange online that they have the Bitcoins on their balance sheet, and the United States government regulates a lot of those exchanges, although not all of them, you know, they have them on their balance sheet, and you're trusting the humans in charge of said exchange that they have those Bitcoins, and then you just withdraw them when you can. However, again, it should be said that these are exchanges run by humans, and I believe that eventually, you know, if it's a fractional reserve system, which they probably all, or at least most of them are, you
Mhm.
should not use an exchange as a long-term storage mechanism. You should use it as a buying and a learning curve tool. And just to hammer that home, I'm going to give one last chart here before we go, of the total number of Bitcoins on exchanges. So if we see here the number of the white line, the number of Bitcoins
Mhm.
on exchanges went up and up and up and up, and then beautifully it peaked right in March of 2020 of the pandemic. You know, if we go right over here at the end of Epoch
Mhm.
3, again, Epoch 3 being the third halving for
Mhm.
Bitcoin, total supply liquid peaks, and now over the last 3 years now, Jim, it's been doing nothing but going down and down and down, and we're in the fourth epoch, the fourth halving here of its block reward. And so anyway, if you extrapolate this out mere years, we have a really big problem where pretty much all of them have been bought. They've been bought by psychopaths like me that are buying them and like never going to sell for any amount of US dollars. And you know, anyway, this is number one, an emphasis that don't hold your coins on exchanges, and number two is an emphasis that there's a lot less time, I believe, than people perceive. You know, people think there's 21 million Bitcoins, but in reality, there's only about 2 million or so left on exchanges
Right.
today because they're
So then,
decreasing.
Luke, where do you, if you know, with the exchange, the idea of the exchange being so kind of tenuous, where
Yeah,
then can you, you know, you're not hiding it in your backyard. You're not putting it in a jar and burying it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
where can you hold this
yeah,
that that it's safe? I mean, how do you? This is so new to me.
yeah, yeah,
This currency, where do you hold that? Is there some server that's holding it?
yeah.
How where is it held?
Um, yeah, I don't like to say personally how I do mine, just
No, I
because,
know. Just give a
yeah,
little bit of a
online, I don't
rundown.
want that. Yeah,
No,
I'm,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
but what and I can help you with that after the call, too. But basically, and
Okay.
there's a lot of free resources online for people listening. But basically, what I would say is, just keep it simple. Find an exchange with low fees. You can look those up. Gemini's one, Kraken's one. There's a whole bunch of other exchanges out there, Cash App and Venmo and Strike, a whole bunch of apps and services
Hmm.
have it. So just look up a list, make
Hmm.
sure that you find one that you can withdraw from. So Robinhood is an example, is when you can't withdraw from, and they make
Right.
that clear. So just find one you can withdraw from, with low fees ideally, purchase, and then set up a hot wallet and or a cold wallet ideally,
Hmm.
and then use that. So there's all kinds of different brands and services. I don't want to be accused of
No, I
advertising one,
no.
and frankly, even more, I don't want to say which one I own. Just
Right. No, I
yeah.
understand.
But yeah, that's the basic story. You
Okay.
go to the online cyber bank, in the same way with physical branches, just go to an exchange and
Hmm.
purchase there. You exchange fiat dollars for Bitcoin currency units, and then from there you'll be able to advance from there. But for the average person, that's the easiest way to get started. I know there's a lot of Bitcoiners that would disagree with what I just said, but let's be real here. For the average person, that's the easiest way to get started, get off zero, and then you can continue to learn from there. And once you do this yourself, it feels so easy. You wonder uh, why it ever seemed complicated. It was the same way to me. I thought it was so complicated, but then I did it. And I was like, oh wow, this is
Well, Luke, that's what I
yeah.
appreciate about you. You have a great way of simplifying this and taking a lot of the mystery and things out of it. But
Thanks.
learning the history and what we can apply from history helps us. We should learn from this.
Yeah,
And that's why I appreciate your worldview. And
appreciate it.
I really look forward to being connected and viewing more of your podcasts as this moves forward.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I have a lot more shows out there. People can find me on Twitter, Luke Broyles, Broyles. You can find me
I've been
there. And
spreading the news already.
thank you,
And
thank you.
Bitcoin is incredible and it's incredibly important, which is why it means a lot that you're watching this video and you're taking the time. I do this because I believe it is a really, really important innovation that we've discovered a way to not have a single point of failure at global base layer money. See, fiat money, political currency units, and gold, all other forms of money up to this point in history have had a single point of failure. This has been the largest monetary problem in human history for the last 4,000 years. And now we have Bitcoin, and Bitcoin solves that single point of failure problem. And now, therefore, we have a new single point of failure problem, and that is how do we custody and store that Bitcoin properly for the long term in a safe and secure way that brings peace of mind. That's why I work at the Bitcoin Advisor. If you were to be hit by a bus, does your spouse, do your kids, do your loved ones and beneficiaries know how to access your Bitcoin? Do you have a proper self-custody storage method to where there is no single point of failure? Not from yourself, not from your seed device, not from where your seed phrase is stored. Have you considered these questions? Have you gotten your UTXOs managed? Do you have jurisdictional arbitrage? Have you considered all the trust, taxes, and estate planning requirements that are associated with becoming a high net worth person? Because if you are buying Bitcoin right now, you are going to become a high net worth person. Are you prepared for the amount of Bitcoin you have to skyrocket in value 2x, 5x, 10x, or 100x eventually? That's the time horizon you should have. And so you need to be preparing today for that future. How are you going to custody your Bitcoin? How are you going to leave that Bitcoin for your future generations? Because after all, that's what we do this for, right? You're buying Bitcoin for your kids. You're buying it for your grandkids. And so I highly recommend you start thinking in those long-term time periods now, because companies are coming, charities are coming, high net worth individuals are coming, and all of them are going to realize that having an allocation to a multi-sig collateral custody vault is going to be something that is of serious consideration for them. So once you understand Bitcoin is a beautiful innovation for not having a single point of failure at the base layer currency, now you have to start seriously considering, how do I have my custody stored where there is no single point of failure? Okay, if you want to learn more about that, please click the link in the description. I have dozens of pages of free educational content for you and videos. I'm happy to help in that free way. And then if you want individual help, I'm also happy to help you join the Bitcoin Advisor, where you can be an ongoing client. You can become one of my clients, and I'd be happy to help you in the years to come to make sure your Bitcoin's protected, to where no matter what, no matter if thieves or scammers or spammers or yourself or your family or whoever, no matter whether it's due to theft or loss, misallocation, misplacement, or just other mistakes, I'm happy to help you and be that voice of reason in the coming years ahead. So click the link in the description. I'd be happy to help. Check it out. Thanks.